مدير البرنامج الاكتواري بجامعة ميشيغان انه يتفضل يحدثنا عن التوظيفات.
It's a real pleasure to be back in Beirut and to visit with some of the old friends, and particularly some of my former students from having been teaching here at the Mohana Summer Actuarial Program for a number of years. I'd like to come back and visit with the students and find out what's going on with them and have a chance to renew acquaintances with them. So welcome, and I'm pleased to be here. My goal today is to present as an academic from the United States an academic subject, asset liability management. What I will be doing today is talking about some of the fundamentals of asset liability management. And the handout that will eventually be turned into you is a actuarial study guide produced by the Society of Actuaries, which gives you in 24 pages a summary of the comments that I'll be making today, talking about the subject and giving you a number of superb references that you'll be able to follow on your own after the presentation is over. First of all, what is asset liability management? ALM, the initials, stand for the practice of managing a business so that decisions on assets and liabilities are coordinated. It can be defined as the ongoing process of formulating, implementing, monitoring, and revising strategies related to assets and liabilities in an attempt to achieve a financial objective for a given set of risk tolerances and constraints. The financial objectives and acceptable risk levels are basically defined by management. ALM is relevant to and critical for the sound management of the finance of any institution that invests to meet liabilities. Much of the presentation will be initially talking about life insurance companies, which is where my background comes from. But at the end, I'll show you some of the deviations of the curve for property and casualty or general insurance. And finally, for how pension schemes are also modified from the traditional role. The role of the actuary. Actuaries measure, model, and manage risk. Risk associated with the ALM process is one of the most important risks faced by many insurance companies. Actuaries involved with insurance companies need to be familiar with assets and liabilities and how they are interrelated. The training of most actuaries is on the liability side. It becomes critical in an ALM environment that the knowledge of the asset side and the liability side be merged. The one sort of unique trained professional to do this is the actuary. They understand the technical capacities in the liability side, and they can bring that knowledge to the asset side. Actuaries involved in insurance companies understand the operation of financial markets, the instruments available, and the options embedded in such instruments, as well as the synthetic instruments available to the companies. In addition, financial reporting and product development actuaries need to understand the relationship of the company's assets to their liabilities so they can reflect the risks inherent in the insurer's business and thereby help to achieve its profitability and, more critically, alter its solvency. The coordination of product development, investment operations, and financial reporting is essential for a successful insurance company, and the actuaries themselves are well qualified to perform that role. What are the basics in financial economics that are relevant to asset liability management? There are basically four. Financial economics itself is a very broad topic. Readings in this particular area cover a wide number of economic topics. The first of which is the Markovic portfolio selection model. Under this model, given a riskless lending environment, a borrowing risk environment, investors are presumed to all prefer a single portfolio of risky assets and an optimal portfolio. Markovic designed his portfolio originally in 1952, eventually won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1990, and an understanding of the Markovic theory is fundamental to an understanding of how asset liability management works. The second tool, the CAPM, or the capital asset pricing model, and other related models are evaluating the securities risk and return for developing a precise prediction of the relationship between the risk of an asset and its expected return. The third tool is derivatives, or derivatives. Derivatives are a powerful tool that is involved in hedging portfolio risks. Option pricing theory was developed initially by Black and Scholes in 1973 and supplemented by Merton in 1973 as well. And both Scholes and Merton won the Nobel Prize for their work on this in 1997. The final topic that is basic to an understanding of financial economics is behavioral finance. Theories of modern finance assume that all investors make rational choices based upon rational expectations. Behavioral finance studies cases in which individual behavior does not conform to these expectations. By highlighting some of these instances in which investor and policyholder behavior diverge from rational behavior, the area has important implications for the modeling of assets and liability cash flows. Immunization. As you rapidly discover in asset liability management, one of the critical learning tools is to learn a vocabulary that for many of us is different from that we use in our normal businesses. Immunization itself is defined to be the act of establishing a position such that the value of a position is insensitive, is not sensitive to changes in some specified parameters. The term is most commonly used to describe a liability and a supporting portfolio such that the net, or the surplus, is insensitive or immune to changes in interest rates. So you're looking for an environment where interest rate changes will have limited impact upon what is going on. In immunization, there are two sub-definitions. One is duration. Duration, as you see on the slide, measures the sensitivity of the value of an asset to changes in interest rates. Convexity, on the other hand, measures the sensitivity of the duration of the instrument to changes in interest rates. Mathematically, this is known as the first and second derivatives of a price with respect to interest rates. Actuaries need to go back to their roots and look at their mathematical foundations, and these are some of the applications in the world of financial economics that really will come to bear. Duration itself can also be viewed as the elasticity of price with respect to interest rates. Once the values of duration and convexity for a given position are determined, immunization can be accomplished more easily by using securities that have very large relative duration and convexity characteristics in relation to their market values. What you're looking for are instruments such as futures, forwards, and swaps, and caps, and floors, and warrants, and options, and a whole bunch of words that are coming out of the specialized financial markets that are describing various types of instruments that help to accomplish the goal that has been set out in terms of trying to achieve an immunization or an insensitivity to these interest rates. One of the items, one of the particular ways you can work with this is to go through some arbitrage-free interest rate models. The evaluation of interest-sensitive assets, and many of our investments in our firms today are interest-sensitive, and their similar liabilities requires that we have something like an arbitrage-free interest rate model. The most sophisticated model is probably the continuous time model proposed by Heath, Yarrow, and Morton. However, once again, the model itself is highly mathematical and very difficult to implement in practice. So while there is a theoretical model which can be built, the mathematical complexity renders them practically difficult to implement without some specialized mathematical skills. The efficient frontier, going back to Markovic. In 1952, Terry Markovic published a revolutionary article called Portfolio Selection. It was published in a fairly obscure journal at that time, the Journal of Finance. The paper proposed that the investor take into account the impact of a risky security on not only a portfolio's expected return, but also its variability of return. He suggested in this revolutionary article that a primary function of portfolio management is to identify an asset allocation strategy, how you allocate your assets amongst various opportunities, such that it provides the highest expected or mean return for a given level of risk that is acceptable to the investor, or in the alternative, that it provides the lowest level of risk, the second derivative, variance, for a specified level of expected return. Markovic's revolutionary paper introduced the concept of the efficient frontier, representing the entire set of optimal mixes of risky assets for each level of risk. All rational, risk-averse investors, most of us consider ourselves to be risk-averse, will want to select a strategy that is on the efficient frontier. The actual strategy selected will reflect the investor's risk tolerance. This approach allows a portfolio manager to evaluate risk versus reward trade-offs of alternative asset allocations. It can also be used to assemble portfolios of assets or asset classes or individual securities that take advantage of the benefits of diversification when asset class returns do not exhibit perfect correlation. The efficient frontier approach can be used in an asset liability framework as long as the risk and return measures are changed to reflect the joint effects of assets and liabilities on these results. For example, in an insurance company environment, you may want to select an asset allocation strategy that maximizes the expected ending surplus for a given level of risk, or one that minimizes the probability of not meeting the profit objectives. But the efficient frontier is not subject to the limited in its usefulness to asset allocation applications. Indeed, it is used to evaluate risk versus reward trade-offs for any asset liability management decision, such as testing alternative crediting strategies or product designs. Derivatives. ALM, asset liability management, is a decision-making process, and the use of derivatives is an integral part of this process. The derivatives are a very powerful tool within ALM. They can be used to hedge asymmetric risks using options such as calls and puts on the underlying securities, and interest rate contracts such as caps and floors. The power of applying options and interest rate contracts comes from their asymmetric payout pattern. The asymmetric payout pattern is therefore very desirable and hedges risks embedded in the liabilities, such as the minimum guarantee you may have on a fixed annuity. Interest rate swaps represent another means of managing a portfolio using derivatives. They can be used for asset liability duration management or cash flow matching. By overlaying a swap, a portfolio manager can purchase attractive assets regardless of duration and can achieve their goal in portfolio management without incurring unnecessary transaction costs that might have an adverse impact on the total rate of return. Swaps can also be used for portfolio cash flow matching when a fixed rate asset portfolio is used to support floating rate liabilities, or, on the contrary, when you have a floating rate asset portfolio being used to support fixed rate liabilities. To remain competitive in the marketplace, almost all of our insurance companies offer embedded options in their products. Employing well thought out and reasonably priced embedded options will reduce the majority of unhedgeable risks in the future. Because of the complexity of liability products, there is no standard way of hedging, however. Given the flexibility of derivatives, there are many different ways to hedge the same risk. Another term that's used in this field is bank ALM, or value at risk, or VAR. VAR measures in dollars or pounds the risk of a portfolio. The value of a VAR depends on the average rate of the return of the portfolio, the return volatilities of the securities, the correlation of the returns of assets in the portfolio, the time horizon, the assumption of the underlying or joint distribution of the returns, and the confidence level you have in the portfolio. If VAR is benchmark relative, the second bullet on the slide, then the VAR can be calculated as the portfolio net of the benchmark. In that case, the choice of the benchmark also affects the VAR. VAR itself measures and controls risk and is primarily used by the big security firms and investment banks that hold significant positions, especially derivatives. It tells us only that a portfolio manager or a firm may lose no more than a certain amount with a certain confidence level. It does not give us the whole picture of loss distribution, and it does not tell us the potential return that should be expected by a portfolio manager. Two portfolios can have the same VAR with very different return profiles. Therefore, for risk-reward analysis in an asset liability management, VAR itself is not sufficient. The time horizon that you choose as well is very important for calculating the VAR and determining its validity. For securities and bank firms, due to the liquidity concerns of daily mark-to-markets, a daily VAR is usually a valid measure of the risk of a given confidence level. For firms as insurance companies with less interest rate sensitive liability or non-financial investment cash flows, a time horizon matching their accompanying periods, frequently quarterly or annually, would be better and more adequate. Return distribution is the most often addressed problem. Normal distribution is the most commonly assumed and used because of the simplicity, but this only roughly describes the return pattern of most securities. For portfolios that have embedded or standalone options, a normal distribution will fail to capture the asymmetric return behavior. VAR, value at risk, is becoming a very important concept and risk management tool for investors and corporations. Corporate risk management departments, investors, and regulators have gradually recognized its importance and require more and more timely information on VAR. Performance measurement and benchmarking. Investment performance itself, measurement, has always been a critical element of pension fund financial management. Now, however, it is becoming increasingly important as senior management personnel of insurance companies recognize that assessing their fund managers simply on the basis of money or time-weighted return on assets, wholly compared to return on a market index, and regardless of the underlying liability, does not provide a fair assessment and is probably not the best foundation for deciding how best to manage the life insurance company's assets. You can measure the performance in three different ways. You can measure it relative to the market in general, relative to other fund managers, regardless of the funds who they have been responsible, or, more commonly, the performance relative to other institutions with similar liability profiles. Analyzing performance relative to the other institutions with the same liability profile involves measuring performance using asset liability benchmark analysis. Your objective in this case is to compare the returns on the actual asset portfolio against a notional portfolio that has generally the same expected cash flow characteristics as the underlying liability. In product development, asset liability management is becoming increasingly important to work in terms of making sure that you have done adequate measurement before you develop products. In the United States, the American Academy of Actuaries has an actuarial standard of practice, ASOP number 14, labeled When to Do Cash Flow Testing for Life and Health Insurance Companies, that mentions product development and pricing studies and testing of policyholder dividend scales and future non-guaranteed elements as areas for which cash flow testing should be considered. The standard, issued in 1990, at a time when many companies had recognized the importance of using ALM techniques in the ongoing monitoring of product portfolios and in product pricing. An American actuary working in this field is subject to that standard. Failure to recognize the standard in developing pricing a product would mean that they have unsatisfactorily met the standards of practice in the United States. The rapidly increasing sales of variable products with guaranteed minimum death benefits and more recently guaranteed minimum income benefits has heightened the need for ALM and pricing. Property and casualty insurance in the U.S. general insurance in the rest of the world. The investment and financial background that actuaries need for ALM analysis is largely the same, with two major exceptions: stock duration and option pricing. General insurance companies have more common stock in investment portfolios on average than life insurance companies do. Duration itself measures for common stock and the relationship of stock values to changes in interest and inflation rates, therefore become more important for general insurance companies than for life companies. Option pricing methods are becoming increasingly used by casualty actuaries for the quantification of risk. Since ALM analyses deal with the trade-off of risk and return, particularly for property and casualty companies, the yardstick of measuring risk is an essential component of such an analysis. For fixed income and fixed liability payments, immunization and analysis and investment strategy for general insurance companies parallel those for life companies. However, you need to recognize for general reserves that there are three types of complications not found in traditional life insurance. In general, P&C reserves are inflation sensitive. These reserves generally have short durations, and they have short duration contracts in the industry, but with a high renewal rate. These differences need to be recognized when you're looking at the modeling that would be done in a property and casualty environment. Finally, on to pensions. Pensions have some significant differences from the activities of life insurance companies. The asset liability management process operates in a distinctly different framework for pension plans than it does for life insurance, due mostly to one very important difference in financial risk exposure. Sudden, adverse capital market results that have the potential to push an insurance company into a terminal condition, bankruptcy or failure, do not occur in pension plans. Pension plans in general don't go bankrupt. Thank goodness for those of us that are close to retirement age. They don't go bankrupt because they have an ability to keep an ongoing pension plan cost allocated back to the sponsoring organization, as long as the sponsor remains viable as an ongoing entity. In effect, the ongoing pension plan is a very important asset that automatically adjusts to keep the total assets balanced with the total plan liabilities, namely the current value of all future contributions from responsible for the plan. The consequences of this difference are very significant. Life insurance ALM is often focused on matching assets and liabilities in such a way that short-term mismatches are very tightly controlled. Pension plan ALM, on the other hand, is more focused on quantifying the various financial implications of having a greater or lesser portion of the fund in equity-type investments, that is, assets that do not match the short-term interest sensitivity of the liabilities. It's the long tail of the liability that creates advantages for the pension plan that do not exist in the life insurance environment. In summary, what have we been talking about? We've been talking about a system that helps an organization that is ultimately responsible for defining its own financial objectives and acceptable risk levels by taking a tool, asset liability management, that is both relevant and critical to the sound management of finances of any institution that invests to meet liabilities. The study guide that has been handed out to you, published by the Society of Actuaries, is available on the Society of Actuaries website, is, I think, you'll discover as you go through there, particularly with the number of references to other books, articles, particularly useful tool as you get more deeply involved, and it's very important, very critical management tool to help make sure that you are capable of meeting the obligations that you have taken on and have guaranteed